key focus is being sexualized as a boy.
The first encounter I had to understand about sex, it was my uncles. And I remember very well my uncles sitting down every evening to look through at women. My uncle would look at a huge woman passing by and they would say a comment like, she has handles.
Yeah.
So my first 12 years was really, really difficult because I had to keep up with this sexual pressure. And to a certain point, I then became confident with girls. I became the playboy. Words just flew. The words just flew out of me, confusing these poor girls. But yes, to answer your question, when it came to a point of you are now in action, we are kissing, there is no thinking about it. As soon as we kiss, you know it has to lead to sex. We need to be in bed at some point. If we are in the streets, we are kissing in the streets, I'll start making arrangements to get to the room. It just happens naturally.
Here. And we should thank Regain Trust and all the people who are bringing this program, because only men should face men. That's how we can begin to change the story.
Absolutely.
Men should face men.
Yeah.
You know, if you
problem with men, I would say, I don't want to put it out there. My problem, I would say this, is that you want to read every social cue as an invitation for sex. Somebody is simply complimented to how cute you look.
Yeah.
That one doesn't know me. You had a nice haircut, and poor girl, she have seen you several times. And you look different. You're suited up, and oh wow, Severinos, you look really, really cute today. Like Maria doesn't know me. As soon as I get home, hey, the intention of that hey is to follow up on that social cue.
Yeah.
Because for me, it was an invitation. She has just immediately activated my sexualization right there.
Because
my
now
sexuality.
that's stuck.
Immediately, I want her. Okay. So, yes, not every social cue out there is
an invitation.
Is an invitation for sex. Guys, if you are listening, not every sexual, every compliment is a sexual invitation. No. Take a compliment, say thank you.
And move on.
Move on. It's as simple as that. Okay? You look cute today. Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You move on.
like literally that's
Good day and welcome to what we men get to talk about, bringing to light what is said in the dark. My name is Adriano Fisaki, and today I'm joined by a panel of men. As per usual, we men get to talk about what we men really talk about. The program aims to make sure that what is left in the dark definitely comes to light. Now, today we'll be talking about the sexualization of the boy child. I'm joined by James as well as Tuli. Gentlemen, please just introduce yourself. James?
Well, you introduced us already, so I'm James. I'm from Regain Trust.
Okay. Tuli?
So I'm Tuli. I'm from, Windhoek, Namibia.
Yeah, you're contributor of what we men get to talk about, yeah? And thank you so much for making time and being on the show today, gentlemen. Now, previously, we also discussed that is consent. We've surely seen how this is intertwined with what we're talking about today, the sexualization of the boy child. Many men have been sexualized. We never talk about this. It's sort of something that lures in the dark. It's also a thing of where we say, do men become vulnerable when we talk about men being sexualized? Because it sort of boosts the man's ego. Now, last week in our show, we also saw that two gentlemen on the panel, they got to be really vulnerable, and also how being sexualized has inflicted them being violent and also, abusive towards their partners. Now, gentlemen, from last week's topic, what have you taken from that? We had two gentlemen that spoke of, them being sexualized. Maybe starting with you, James.
Yep. No, I could definitely relate to what they were saying. It's quite interesting, that sort of correlation between my own experiences in terms of how I have experienced sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And how that led to my perpetrating of sexual abuse. And I think we are living in a society that never sees sort of the other side in terms of where men come from. And there's a very unique saying, they actually made a song about it that says, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we never think back and think about, but what may the perpetrator's experiences have been that may have led him to actually perpetrate those acts.
Absolutely.
And I think to sort of preempt the conversation going forward, I've always thought about, in the line of work that I do, I'm often thinking about how do we go back and try and break that sort of, transfer of violence across the generations, especially amongst boys.
Yeah.
And I hope that this is a conversation that we can delve in a lot more. So create platforms that will make it okay for men to talk about.
Exactly.
As a young man, at a very early age, I had been placed in a position where I was sexually abused.
Yeah.
And to openly discuss it without being afraid or being ashamed about it.
Yeah. And I'm so glad because we're going to talk about that later in the show as well. Now, like you said, we're going back, just a little bit back. Yeah. And talking about going back, what has been your first experience when it comes to sex? And when I say sex, not necessarily sort of the first act, but being exposed to sexual activities and the lessons thereof.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, before I even get to your question, one of the things I really want to point out, that this is no way, shape, or form trying to justify what men are doing. Or to say we're trying to diminish the Me Too movement or any of these other movements. This conversation is literally about trying to get men to talk about some of the things we don't talk about.
Yeah.
Because I think if you look at it, whenever somebody is doing something heinous, some heinous crime or something along the line, there has to be a root cause. And for as long as we don't look at the root cause, we'll never fully address or fully get to like a probable solution, right? So having said that, my first experience, for me, I remember, I think I was about 9, 10, 11, but I was quite young.
Yeah.
And it was with a girl who was older than me.
Yeah.
Right. Now,
how many years, if I'm asked?
Probably like 16, 17.
Okay.
You understand? Now, when you're a young kid and something like that happens to you, it's not necessary to say in that moment you don't figure, oh, that was the worst thing that happened.
Yeah.
You understand? Because for a young boy who's busy exploring his sexuality and stuff like that, it's like it's a little bit exciting in that particular moment. So for me, it was exactly that. It was exciting in that moment. It's only years later that I realized, number one, I was taken advantage of.
Yeah.
But number two, the consequences of that one action. Because, I mean, if you think about it, I was not emotionally ready to handle all these sexual feelings that came with that. So what happened was, this girl took advantage of me. We ended up having sex, or whichever way you want to frame it or coin it. And then after that particular experience, what then happened was that, for me, when I look back, was that after that, I now started looking for that excitement.
Yeah.
And remember, this was like, 10, 11, 12? You understand? Which then means that now I couldn't get girls, so I turned to pornography. And for several years, I was addicted to pornography. And after I was like 15, 16, I started realizing that my perspective on how I viewed women from a very young age was very twisted.
Yeah.
I was not necessarily the violent guy or the guy who would grab girls or anything of that sort, but I think for the longest time, I viewed women as sexual objects.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's only later on, like years now down the line, when I consulted the psychologist, went through some counseling and read up on a lot of things, that I started understanding. Also, probably the cause of this was because of all of these things that happened in the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, there's a generation of us, and maybe I'm not going to mention any age, but that has gone through a process of what we deemed heisiki.
Yeah.
And that's what, you never would our parents say, but you can't play with James because James is 2 or 3 years older than you. It was just kids playing in the street, and they would play in someone's backyard. In any form of that, Do you feel that that has also been a space that is allowed, because we've seen ACK has faded out, that has also been a space where this, sexualization has taken place for either the boys or the girl child?
I would say for both, to be quite open and honest and sort of frank about it, because, I often, when I recall my childhood, I'm often amazed at how there was no sort of supervision from any parents at all.
Yeah.
We could, be in this particular location and go and play distances far away from our houses. And that's still sort of the phenomena today.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, you had those environments where you had this mixture of kids, especially the earlier kids. I mean, my sort of personal experiences, my first experience was as a very young child. I was basically a toddler.
Yeah.
Being told by the older kids, get in the box, we'll close the box with the other girl, and then you must make fiki, right? And then they will hide behind the bushes, and then they'll wait for the box to sort of start moving, and for them, that was excitement. But for me, in that moment, I'm pleasing them, and I'm also excited in that particular moment, not realizing that this is basically sexual abuse that's happening right now. And basically what they're teaching you is, this is what you need to do to this girl right now in this moment, even if she's uncomfortable to do it. And I recall so many different moments where you've had older kids putting a lot of pressure on you and telling you, I remember the one time there was a girl sort of walking down my street, and, the older boys pushed in, like, run up to this girl, go and kiss and come run back.
Yeah. Sure.
And that was now an achievement once I had done it. But what did I basically do? I traumatized that girl.
Yeah.
And it was a form of sexual abuse.
Absolutely.
Even though I was a minor and didn't fully comprehend what I was doing. So it's very common that it's happening. And the interesting thing is the fact that we are living in a society that decides to turn a blind eye to it.
Absolutely.
We turn a blind eye completely to it, and then, boom, when we have these high incidences of rape cases, then we start focusing on, look at that man who has raped this woman.
Exactly.
Never going back to that
The root
childhood
cause.
era of, but what was the upbringing of this child like? I mean, and on top, so there are many, so it's not just, having experienced sexual abuse at a once-off occasion.
Yeah.
It's something that happened at various milestones of your age. I mean, the earlier age for me was when I was placed inside that box and told that I must have sex with this girl. And another stage, I was barely about more or less the same age that you were, about 7, 8.
Yeah.
Where I had an 18-year-old girl tell me that, we're going to go and have sex, let's go to the toilet. And she would literally tell me what to do in terms of having sex. And then later on having, some form of a cousin, then, being trusted in the household. You're left with her in the household, and your mom has to go to work.
Yeah.
And then, the minute your mom leaves, it turns into a little porn show because this girl then calls you up to the bed that you must do A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
So the men, and women have had multiple different experiences. And then oftentimes later on I realized that perhaps the things that the older girls were doing, could it have been that some older man or some older boy did them to them, and it was normalized. So they are then just repeating what they were sort of conditioned and socialized to do. So we have a whole society filled with sexual abuse at very early ages, and we're not addressing it at those ages.
Exactly.
We're just basically focusing at the sort of adult ages when you have adult men or women perpetrating acts of sexual violence.
And adding to that is also in that instance of yours where it's believed that the boy child, is supposed to sort of be exploited of. Yeah. It's the man's duty to be having sex. So, whether this older woman does it with you, whether she, violates you, it's sort of seen that boosts your ego as a man. Yeah. And during that instances, how did that make you feel?
I mean, I like what G said because he took the words right out of my thoughts. Because during that moment, as a young child, you're going behind the excitement of it. There's some kind of a thrill behind it. And obviously you could sense and feel the sensations around it. Only later on do you start realizing the damage that it has had and the impact that it has had on your life. Because my sort of teenage years was I was a teenager that was overly, they normally say that, a person who's been a survivor of sexual violence or a victim of sexual violence, one of the sort of after effects that they have is that they become hypersexualized. I was an extremely hypersexualized teenager. All I could think about was sex. I would look at my teacher, I'm thinking about sex. I'm looking at my peers, I'm thinking about sex. And I'm trying to exploit and find all the little opportunities where I can get to engage in a sexual activity, because that's what I was taught to do.
Sure. And we're going to come to the consequences of that later on. But Tuli, your experience, maybe just share that with us as well, because I want to delve into, did you have a conversation with either a parent, your mom, a cousin, someone older to say, you know what, this has happened to me and I don't know what to do about this? Or is it that thing of where your friends are like, no, Tuli, you're the man?
Yeah. Because look, the thing is, especially within the black family or the black culture, in Namibia or in Africa per se, specifically, I think most conversations that have to do with sex or anything sexual are oftentimes non-existent.
Yeah.
Like that's the one thing we really need to do as a society, change as a society first and foremost. Because of that, there's a lot of things that happen to our kids, within homesteads and within households.
Yeah.
But they can never be said out because the environment is never being created. Like that safe space for kids to have the conversation has never been created. So for me, that was the thing. And by the way, mind you, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, it's my parents' fault or anything of that sort. I am saying that it's something that is there.
Yeah.
Perhaps, but that's the way they were brought up, and that's just what they passed on. But for me, what happened was that it was never like there's a space for me to talk about it.
Yeah.
Even amongst my peers, it was never like, oh yeah, let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. Even if we're going to talk about it, it's not going to be a conversation of, oh man, I did this, but it made me feel that way. It's more like I did this and it was exciting and
and sort of like an achievement.
Yes, sort of like an achievement.
Yeah.
So that environment is never created. And I think part of the problem is actually that within our cultures or within the black families, that there's a lot of things that happen, but then the space to have a conversation about these things is rarely ever.
Yeah. Now, talking about upbringing, James, I believe previously on the show, and I please correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned that you grew up single mom, boys were supposed to do girl chores and girls boys chores. During that time, did you perhaps then go to your mom or any relative or any person in the house to say, you know what, this is happening to me, or to your peers, or to the guys that, you would sit amongst the street on the corners and the ones that would push you towards the girls to say, guys, this is what I'm dealing with internally because of my experiences?
You see, the tricky bit is that in that moment, you may not actually realize that what is happening to you or what is being done to you is causing you psychological harm. And I remember oftentimes feeling that because I was a boy, I was the one that was in the wrong for having engaged in that act. So should we get caught, it's not the 18-year-old that was going to be questioned. I, as the boy, was going to be questioned because normally that's the sort of society that we live in. And I think, the issue with the whole thing around parenting and how we parent children back then, and it's still present today, is there's a massive gap that we've created. We've literally created a wedge between parents and children in such a way that parents and children can't relate to one another at all. Because, what's the most common saying that we say about children in Africa is that children should be seen, not heard.
Absolutely.
Right? So even if you walked into a space where there were adults and you tried to engage with your mom, you would be chased out of that space because as a child, you're not supposed to be in the presence of adults having conversations. And it was never an issue of you having a conversation with your mother. It was about your mother talking to you and giving you instructions, and you need to obey. So, like what Tuli was saying, that in terms of we as parents, there wasn't a space that was created or an enabling environment to allow a child to come and talk about, but so and so touched me in this way. It never happened at all. So I can imagine that there are so many children, so many of us as adults in our age, in our generation, who had experienced sexual abuse and never said anything about it. We sort of put it back in our minds, and then yet a small percentage of those of us who had experienced this are now perpetrators.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And we still haven't dealt with it. There are so many people who have experienced sexual abuse and still don't deal with it to this day and age.
Yeah.
And they are now sort of feeling the repercussions thereof. Some people don't even make that sort of connection between, I'm doing things the way I'm doing them now
because
of what I had experienced in my childhood.
And as a society, we encourage this. We encourage this type of behavior amongst men. More as a society, we also encourage and create this platform where, like you said, it's so scary and this fear for the boy child to speak up about being sexually violated. And that fear of, you know what if I do, what will they say as a society? And why?
I mean, look.
Why don't men speak up, maybe?
We're sort of talking about this from dare I say, from a heteronormative perspective, in terms of men who have experienced sexual abuse at the hands of women.
Yeah.
But I'm of the belief that men, and especially boys, are more likely to experience sexual abuse at the hands of men.
Yeah.
And because of the fact that we live in a society that's homophobic, men that have experienced sexual abuse at the hands of other men, it becomes a taboo for you to talk about it. You cannot talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, as young boys, we must have had experiences where we play as young boys and explore sexuality, and then these two boys then go off and then they start having sex with one another. And a lot of the times it's the older boy sort of inducting this younger boy, and it starts at that age already. Yet there's a shroud of silence around it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that men have been conditioned and socialized that there are certain things that happens to us and that we do, and those things within the umbrella of toxic masculinity, there's a little hidden corner. And that it's a well cemented hidden corner, and we pack it all in there and we seal it, never to be discussed. And in as much as we seal it, from time to time, these experiences erupt, and they start influencing us in terms of our adulthood. But I think, to answer your question, I think there's probably a lot of shame that is associated. Firstly, shame that's associated to it. So not just for men, for girls as well.
Absolutely.
Because the first thing that I can think a pedophile or a person that perpetrates sexual violence will do to a young child is to tell that young child that what we're doing is our little secret.
And it stays between us.
And it stays between us. And should we get caught, you as the child will get into a lot of trouble. So there's then that element of fear from this child that it's something terrible that I'm doing that I've never known this. I've never done this. It's my first experience. And if I talk about it, it's going to cause problems, and I'm going to bring even the perpetrator into trouble, but I'll be the one that will be the main culprit that have done this because I'm a little bad boy or I'm a little bad girl, and I'll be punished for it. So there's this shroud of silence where a lot of these things happen, and kids cannot. There's no platform for them to come out and talk about it. And this for me is very worrisome, and it scares the living daylights out of me that we live in a society where, on the sort of superficial levels, we assume that we're in this functioning, healthy society.
But it's not.
But if you really dig deeper, you'll start seeing, the many toxic things happening to children that scar them for the remainder of their lives, and that could potentially influence them to become perpetrators.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Tuli, and I want to maybe ask that you add on that, and especially the society that we live in now, when violence is sort of seen as a shame, and that, if you and James are cousins, let's rather keep it in the family, just apologize to one another. We've seen that in recent papers, and that's okay. As a family, this is not going to go out. What's your take on that?
I think, look, the biggest problem, like I said, one of the biggest problems is the culture. Like James said, the culture of shame, the culture of let's keep it quiet, the culture of when you say something, you are kind of like going against the family or going against the norm or anything of that sort. And what's interesting with what James said is that oftentimes that it comes out.
Yeah.
And it comes out at the worst times. And sometimes things happen to people, and then all of a sudden now they're exposed to the rest of the world. That's what we say, well, this is what you understand.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, and I always say this: when you are a young child, there's things that happen to you that you have no control over.
Absolutely.
That you cannot do anything about. But when you grow older, you get to a place now where you are responsible, and you need to start taking certain actions and doing certain things differently.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we need to look at and relook and readjust is the fact that certain things do happen to you when you're a child. But at some point as a man, you need to get up and say, yo, this is not right.
Yeah.
You understand? I mean, I can't go back and change the things that happened to me in the past.
Yeah.
Or things that I did in the past. But now I'm at a point where I'm like, no, but I can't continue doing the same things.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
And I think this is where, especially with the Me Too movement and a lot of things, this is where people especially are getting angry, because it's like, no, yeah, but I understand something happened to you in your child, but like, as a grown man, what is your excuse?
Yeah.
You understand? And I think
The childish behavior needs to end at some point.
You
Yeah.
understand? I mean, like at 15, 16, 20, and maybe you can understand, but at some point you need to say, yo, something is not right with me. I need to either go see a psychologist, go see a counselor, or talk to somebody who's going to advise me, but I need to seek a solution or find a way to deal with this.
Yeah.
And then, like, the culture of secrecy and what is it, hiding and boxing it away, especially amongst men. That's the most difficult one.
Absolutely. Because in Namibia, we do know of women being raped, but amongst men, we do not know the rapists.
At all.
Oh, we always shrug our shoulders. Oh, I don't know a rapist. Like, who?
I mean, with men, I mean, it literally, the most, for me, the most toxic thing men have been conditioned, in specifically speaking in the context in which I've grown, which is Namibia, is the fact that we tell men that they can never be vulnerable. And if should a man be taken advantage of sexually, we tell them it's going to strip away your manhood completely. That's one of the ways in which you easily lose your manhood. And I believe that, for instance, if you compare it to a prison setting, I generally believe that is the reason why men in prison rape other men. It's not so much about the sexual pleasure, but it is about stripping that man and taking power away from him. And how do you do that? You take away his manhood completely by force, and it changes who that man is within that setting.
Absolutely.
I mean, so and I think, I mean, for me the issue is, we talk about like what Tuli was saying, like, why is it that later on in our adult lives, we don't sort of address these issues and create the connection between, oh, I'm doing the things I'm doing now. I'm the type of person that doesn't understand the concept of consent now, because when I was 12 years old, a group of older boys sort of placed pressure on me to go and kiss a girl against her will. And when I had done that, I had received some form of a status and elevated my position in the friendship circle. So, and now it's in this box, we don't talk about it. And the first thing about a person being able to address their problems is being able to identify what the cause of that problem is.
Exactly.
And for as long as you haven't gotten to that point, and often the only way you get to that point is by having a conversation with either a social worker or a psychologist to really sit and take you back to your childhood experiences and say, but what is it about your childhood that you think may have had an impact on how you're behaving right now? And less so for men. Men are, because these things are cemented in this little box, hidden away. And for as long as men don't get to break this box and open up all of this so that they can start the process of healing, this cycle of violence that we're seeing in our society, especially the cycle of sexual violence, it will never end.
Exactly. And I want to now get into one thing that you've mentioned repeatedly, which is the rape. We've seen rape culture. We've seen violence towards women and maybe violence towards men as well. And do you men think tonight that based on that, and based on the fact that, you know, the sexual experience from such a young age has sort of had repercussions in your love lives and perhaps your relationships, perhaps your way of addressing yourself and maybe sexually towards your partners as well?
For me, it was the earlier years. I think when I was from 15, 16, and I discovered pornography for a couple of years. I think for like 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
Right. And how did that change everything? Just first, how it changed my my understanding or my understanding towards women, or how I act towards women, was not necessarily that I wanted to force myself on women, but it was like I saw women as sexual objects, like for my personal satisfaction.
Yeah.
Which then meant that for the most part, I couldn't have a functional relationship with any woman because, well, 2 minutes after we're in it, I'm like, yo, why are you not doing what I want? Why are you not satisfying me? Why are you not pleasuring me? It's all about my pleasure.
Yeah.
You understand? And for a number of years, I went through that, and then I think I got over the pornography stage. And then after that, it was now the stage where I really had to recover from all of that, and which actually took a while.
Yeah.
One of the things that was interesting for me was that when I look back, I was like, most of this would have not been possible had I not been exposed to certain environments. Environments where I had access to either a counselor or a psychologist, or I sought professional help in some of the things. And I think what's interesting is that also there's another culture, especially amongst, this is not generally amongst black people. Sorry, but it's true. We don't do psychologists at all.
That is way too common. It's so true. Either you're crazy or
the moment people say, people just see you as like, oh, something is wrong with you.
Yeah.
And I think especially for me that like in those beginning stages where I seen a counselor, I think it was at UNAM, then I went to see a friend who was a counselor or studying to be a counselor, and starting that conversation, and then a few years later I went to go see a professional counselor, then a few years later I went to go see a psychologist and stuff like that. Just that initial stage of actually admitting, I think I have a problem, and I think I need to talk to someone. That first initial step was actually one of the, for me, was one of the most difficult ones. Because I think once the ball got rolling, even when I went to go see a psychologist the last time, it was like, oh, I have a problem, let me go. Yeah, it became that easy. But in the beginning, it was like, yo, who do I talk to? Where do I go? Why should I talk?
Where do I start?
Do I trust this person? You understand? And so, and I think it also in some instances as well, it's also a situation of when people go see a counselor or a psychologist or somebody, they go look for help from an auntie or an uncle.
Yeah.
Sometimes the auntie is more worried about, or the person within the family is more worried about protecting the family's reputation than it is taking care of this
Absolutely.
person. And that actually adds on, and that's another layer to the problem. Because now it means even when people do speak out, they're shut down.
Yeah.
Even when young boys do speak out, or where they do confide in someone, they're shut down or they're shamed, which then means that you have to suppress even further.
Yeah.
It's like I open myself up to be vulnerable, but now
Exactly.
like I need to bring it down.
Maybe even sent away.
Maybe just to add to what Tuli was saying, I think because it's interesting how our journeys are quite similar. Because I think for me, the turnaround point was when I realized that what I'm yearning for in a relationship is not so much the sexual gratification, but really intimacy.
Yeah.
And that intimacy doesn't always have to be sexual.
Yeah.
And you know, and having been exposed in the line of work that I do, you learn that of issues such as skin hunger.
Yeah.
Psychologists often talk about skin hunger.
Yeah.
And they basically say that, it's interesting that when a child is a baby, they get a lot of affection and they get a lot of touch. They become a toddler, they get a lot of affection, they get a lot of touch.
Yeah.
They start transitioning into a teenager. The girl child gets a lot of touch, they get a lot of affection. The boy child is told to man up. And then that sort of intimacy from the parents. And oftentimes we always assume, no, intimacy must be sexual. It doesn't always have to be sexual. That intimacy is then cut. So I often think that, when you have men out there engaging in multiple concurrent sexual partnerships, with men who are having serial monogamous relationships, I often assume that at the core of it, it's a man that's really just yearning for intimacy. But because of his past experiences, has never learned how to experience intimacy in a healthy way, and how to seek deeper, meaningful relationships. Because I think that's something that scared me. It scared the living daylights out of me when I questioned myself that, will I ever be able to have a deep, meaningful relationship with a woman beyond her physical appearance, beyond my need for sexual gratification? I think that's when it started challenging me that I must start seeking deeper and much more meaningful relationships.
Absolutely.
Yet men we're not creating the space, and we're not, enabling men to be able to do that in our society.
And it starts from a very young age, like you said, with the boy and the girl child, it's done in total different means. Now, last week on the show, we had one of the gentlemen that spoke of something very interesting. And I think we as men have sexualized women, whether it's the size of their body, their hair, their skin tone, and men in turn have been sexualized, like, or tall black man, or I love his legs, or I love his fingers, I love his manhood, or girls love, it's been done. So in essence, how have you been sexualized as a man, and maybe in your adult life now, and how has that sort of made you feel?
Man, let's call a spade a spade.
Yeah, let's call a spade a spade.
All right. I honestly feel and believe that men in terms of being sexualized, we tend to do that amongst each other more than what women would do.
Okay.
Because remember, we come from a society that has taught us that as men, we should be the alphas. We should be at the forefront. We are the ones that hunt. So in terms of relationships, we are the ones that must initiate. For girls, they're told that you can't do that. And the minute you do that, if a girl does that, she's slut-shamed. So you don't have a lot of women out in our society who would sexualize women, unless unless they have it in their little circle of friends, and they talk about it amongst each other. Now, men, and one of the biggest ways in which men sexualize each other is we compare penises. Penis size for men has become a sort of a test, trying to see how strong your manhood is. And that's why we have a society where men are so, you often have men that have deep-rooted insecurities about penis size. And yet, we have public toilet, public spaces where, the urinals are so close to each other, so obviously we have to go and pee. And now you're seeing this guy, he pees like this, you pee like this. And you start developing little insecurities, and you then build an added myth to that. Because the myth is that the alpha male is the male that has the biggest, thickest penis out there, right? And he's the type of man that would be able to have sex with a woman for 30 minutes nonstop. Now here I come with my average size penis, or even perhaps a smaller penis, and I engage in a sexual act with my partner, and she perhaps does not have an orgasm.
Absolutely.
Then it hits my ego.
Yeah.
And then I see Tuli walking by, and I can see the outprint. I don't know what you call it for women that speak of a camel toe. I don't know what we talk about here. The camel hump. I don't know.
The bulge.
And he talks to my girlfriend, and then I start having an insecurity about it, because in my mind I'm like, but he would be able to satisfy my girlfriend better than I ever would be, because of my deficiency that I have with my penis. And that causes deep-rooted insecurities with men.
Okay, exactly. Gentlemen, we've almost come towards the end of our show, but I want to ask you, and this is something serious that we've seen in the country, violence towards women. And the question is, why is it that within our space, within our Namibian society, is it that we see violence towards women being perpetrated on such a larger scale?
Look, I think there's a lot of reasons to this.
What do you think can be done, if I may also add to that?
Yeah, and I think it's not, I can't pinpoint one specific reason to say this is the reason for all of this. But what I can say is that I think we need to recognize that there's a lot of very toxic traits within our cultures, within our families, and within our society in general.
Yeah.
And a lot of these toxic traits are either things that we inherited from our parents, from our families, from in all of these things, and the way to deal with them, and the way to deal with toxic cultures and toxic traits, so that we don't pass it on to the next generation. First and foremost, by taking responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah.
Because I always say this: when you get into a relationship, you take 100% of who you are into that relationship.
Absolutely.
You understand? Which then means that 100% of who I am is what I'm giving to my partner.
Yeah.
And if I have a lot of toxic traits, 100%, that's what I'm going to give to that relationship. That's what my partner is going to inherit.
Yeah.
And guess what? If two toxic people get together,
it's a nuclear bomb.
and they produce a child.
Yeah.
You understand? Under this thing.
Yeah.
Guess what happens? You're most likely to pass on these toxic things to that specific child. Hence why it's very important for us as either men or women to take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah.
Forget about your person you're going to date or the person you're dating, whoever you like, whatever. Forget about other men. Forget about like everybody else. Just focus on yourself.
Yeah.
Once you start taking responsibility for yourself, and then from there you change your own trajectory, like your destiny.
Yeah.
I know this in my family. Everybody's done A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Yeah.
But I'm choosing to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
The moment you do that, and in the next 10 years you have a child, you have completely managed to change like a whole destiny of a child of somebody else out there.
A generation, exactly.
You see, for me, and I agree with Tuli that there are so many different issues at play in our society that lead to, the violence that we're seeing that being perpetrated against, especially women. And I think one of these, for me, it has to do with men and how we have not enabled men to be vulnerable. And the unfortunate thing is, a couple of months ago, I said something quite bold in a public space where I said that, we've raised men in our society to have a lower IQ than what women have. EQ. Emotional quotient. Meaning that men, we are more likely to have men that have a lower emotional intelligence than women. And emotional intelligence is how you are able to dwell within your insecurities and process those insecurities in a healthy manner, in a sort of constructive manner, and get to a point that should you not be able to deal with them, you have the emotional intelligence to seek help. We've not afforded men that space, and we've not created that space for men to be able to do so. So now what we have in our society is men that are dealing with a lot of insecurities. I believe that men that perpetrate violence, especially intimate partner violence, are men that are extremely insecure within themselves. And you see these little traits, and they're very easy to pick up because I had these traits myself. So if you're the type of man that is overly obsessed with what time of the day your partner, what time of the day your partner comes home, who your partner spends time with, what type of clothing your partner wears, and you're constantly trying to put boundaries and walls around your partner to protect the partner. And then it's not necessarily, to be honest, it's not protecting the partner. It's protecting your little insecurity that you have. So you'll find men that would literally push women away from even being able to have to be friends with people of the opposite sex. I've done this myself. So men, if you start seeing these traits within yourself, that man, I'm constantly overly insecure. I often sit at home or at work and I become obsessed with what my partner is doing. I literally try and track every little hour of her day. Where is she doing? And could there be a 2-minute opportunity for her to cheat on me? These type of men are men that have an increased likelihood towards perpetrating acts of violence. And these are the type of men that we really need to reach out to. So, I mean, my appeal to Namibian men on this show is to say that if you are that type of man that have that type of insecurity,
Yeah.
my brother, it's time to seek help.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, James, you could not have said it better. Tuli, any last words from you? I think James has almost summed it up. He's almost summed it up.
How do I go after that?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think for me, it's just a thing of, look, like I said, when you are younger, things happen to you and you have no control over those things. But as you grow older, especially when you realize that you've got a problem or you've got issues or there's certain things you are not coping, you're not dealing with them well.
Yeah.
It is your response. At some point, you do not have an excuse as to why you did not take responsibility for yourself. You understand? You as a child, things happen. But as an adult, it is your job and your responsibility to take responsibility. If you're a man, take responsibility. Say, look, listen, I'm not coping well. I'm not doing well. I've got something is bothering me. I've got issues.
Exactly.
I'm going to seek for help.
Yeah.
I'm going to call Lifeline, Childline. I'm going to search for James on social media to say, James, listen, I'm not dealing with this properly.
Exactly.
You understand? So as an adult, you do not have an excuse to not deal with this properly.
Exactly. As an adult, there's no excuse for you to also not report this, because not reporting this means that you are condoning sexual violence. From my side, Adriano, it's been a ball. It's been a blast. Thank you so much to Regain Trust, also to Men Engaged Namibia Network, as well as the United Nations Population Fund. We'll be back very soon.